Perfect. Great. Welcome everyone to the first event of this year's Sustainable Fashion Week. My name's Delphine. I'm the Policy and Research Coordinator for Fashion Revolution. And I'm here today with Ruby from WUKA and with Charlie from Offset Warehouse and Sustainable Fashion Collective. Today, we're going to talk about the life cycle of a garment and the environmental impact of the fashion industry on the planet. We're also going to look at what happens to our clothes when they end up in the bin and the tips that we can get. We'll get some tips as well from both of our speakers on what to look for when we're buying clothes. I guess to start off with a few fun stats and facts about the fashion industry and its environmental impacts. We know waste is a huge issue in the fashion industry. So globally, it is estimated that 92 million tons of textile waste are created every year, and about a truck full of clothes ends up in landfill every second. And by 2030, this figure is going to increase as well, which is obviously quite alarming. And from a carbon footprint perspective, it is estimated that the fashion industry contributes to 4% of the global greenhouse gas emissions, and especially at material production level. And even then, we don't actually know exact figures for the carbon footprint of the fashion industry. So through our research at Fashion Revolution for the Fashion Transparency Index that we do every year, we found that only 16% of the largest fashion brands in the world actually track their carbon footprint at raw material level, which is obviously quite a shocking figure. So with this in mind, we can see that the fashion industry has a very long way to go to truly mitigate its impact on the planet. So to start off, I'd like to ask our speakers if they could give a little bit of background about their business and what was that light bulb moment they had when they realized the fashion industry had a really negative impact on the planet. Cool. So if you could start off, Ruby, I'll start off with you.
All right, cool. Hello, everyone. This is my first event, actually, after nearly 2 years, in-person event. I'm Ruby. I'm the CEO and co-founder of WUKA. We make period pants that completely replace the need for disposable tampons and pads. I think I've got like slightly two different perspectives, one of the East and one of the West. I was born and brought up in Nepal. And at 20 years old, I came here to UK. And I think looking from the two angle and two perspective, I've come from a very sustainable world to very unsustainable world. Because growing up, I think I never got a new clothes. It was always passed from my sister to another sister to me, and then went to the cousins, and that way, it always worked that way, whether that's clothes, shoes, books, and here, everything we expect to have new. My almost like a eureka moment was I did environmental science as a degree here in Open University, and that really opened my eyes because one whole year I was just learning about waste management, and it shows me, opened the eyes of like waste management here might be quite good compared to East, but the amount we consume is way more compared to the East. So yeah, that's me.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. And how about you, Charlie? What was that light bulb moment?
Yeah, the light bulb moment. So my name is Charlie Bradley Ross, and I am the founder of Offset Warehouse and the Sustainable Fashion Collective. Offset Warehouse was born about 12 years ago, and basically through this aha moment when I was doing my degree in fashion design, and I decided after watching a documentary called, what is it called? China Blue, which kind of looked at the kind of slave labor within the China manufacturing district. I decided, everything that you create as a designer, regardless of what industry you're in, is meant to be beautiful and cherished. And how can you create something that might have exploited somebody at the beginning of, before it's even got to the customer? So I started trying to make my designs more responsibly, starting with the fabrics, and realised it was almost impossible to find textiles that I knew hadn't exploited somebody or hadn't been made using toxic chemicals. The list went on, and it was so frustrating. I started pulling together all of the research that I had done and finding these kind of gems of suppliers who were working in a really beautiful, holistic, responsible way, and basically put all that research online, and found that there were more designers like me who were looking for the same things and also experiencing that incredible frustration with not being able to find anything, eventually asking, can I have a meter of that? And could I get that as well? And it just turned into this kind of enormous thing where eventually we had to bring in all the fabrics into a warehouse, which is why we're called Offset Warehouse, and that was when the business was born. So we sell fabrics by the meter that are socially and environmentally beneficial, and so that was about 10 years ago, and since then, thankfully, we've seen a kind of a rise in advocacy and more designers understanding their impact and wanting to do more, but being really confused as to how to do it. And so, we were getting, because we were one of the only kind of ethical textiles companies in the UK, loads and loads of questions about what is the best certification to have, what's the best fibre, how do I make swimwear ethically? And so we decided again to put all of the research online and start what's now called the Sustainable Fashion Collective, so that brands can come and dip into the information. For £30 a month, you can get everything on the platform, and kind of accelerate that learning so that you can learn from other brands, other designers, all that kind of stuff. Yeah.
No, absolutely. That's and I guess, as you mentioned, obviously different materials have very different environmental impacts. So I think for brands and consumers, especially today with all the information we get from the media and all these brands releasing new sustainable collections, and so it's quite confusing to know what type of material is actually sustainable and what type of material actually has the lowest environmental impact. So in your opinion, both of you, how do you weigh up these decisions as a brand and obviously as an advisor to brands as well?
Okay, I think when you're starting any business, you need to look at the full cycle, from the sourcing of the material to production to shipping, and consume. And after consume as well, what are you going to do with it, kind of thing. Because I think I was quite fascinated with the whole waste kind of thing. We started a business was on the basis that how can we reduce the amount of the plastic waste that ends up in landfill, right? But I definitely was very fascinated, and since the day one, we chose lensing modal as one of our prime fabric for our underwear, and there's quite a lot of misconception within the modal fabric. It's like you have got normal modal, and that you have got lensing modal, and you need to find out and they are made from beech tree fabric. Is the beech tree that the trees cut down to make the pulp and into yarn, are they forest certified or not? So that's the level you go into transparency. And then you go like, okay, lensing modal, who have been putting so much money, research, everything into it, you tend to go for that. But there are brands who sell it like, they are beech tree fiber kind of thing, and then sell modal, which actually nobody knows where they come from, if the trees are forest certified or not. So I think you need to start from there. If you are trying to start any kind of, I think starting point should be there in terms of like, is the fabric that you're sourcing from is the right place?
Yeah, fair enough. And how about you, Charlie? What's your view on how to pick materials, especially for a new brand? It's very confusing to know exactly what you should be using, and obviously different materials have different purposes. So if you're a swimwear company, you might want to use different types of materials compared to if you're a women's wear company.
Yeah. Oh, it's such a big topic to unpick. I would say that every fabric has an environmental and social impact, and maybe just kind of start this conversation with, there's no perfect fabric. It just doesn't exist. So sometimes I get designers so frustrated that they can't find the perfect fabric that doesn't do any damage at any level, and it just doesn't exist. So I think, in my opinion, as long as you're choosing a textile that is beneficial in some way, so either environmentally or socially, that is the best start that you can make. And so if you find a fibre that you really love and you think this is what I want to work with, you know, if you're a swimwear brand, it's going to be really difficult to work with anything but synthetics. So you start with synthetics and then you think, okay, how do I now narrow this down so that I'm working with a synthetic that is the best it can be? So maybe it's recycled, maybe it's using a fibre that is from a man-made cellulosic. You know, there are so many different ways that you can lower your impact. So, but I think if you start with like, which fabric should I choose in the whole world? It's so overwhelming. So yeah, I hope that helps a little bit.
No, absolutely, and I think you're right. It's completely impossible to think of a fibre that doesn't have an environmental or social impact. So
yeah,
it's absolutely true. It's about.
And can I expand on what Ruby said as
Yeah,
well about the modal fabrics? I think that's so important. You know, I think a lot of people think if it's got the name, you know, if it's an organic fabric, it's immediately better and that's the best thing that you can get. But that's not, unfortunately, not the case. No. So, you know, the majority of modal fabrics are not lensing. They are very damaging to the environment. They are being produced using forests that are being completely demolished, and actually it's really, really damaging. So I think it's also a really good point to look at exactly what fibre you are using. So if you're using a cotton, it might not be organic, but is it rain-fed, watered? You know, because that's the case, you know, for a lot of organically agricultured or grown textiles. So yeah, sorry, that was just another point on
like
to what Ruby said.
GOT certification,
yes.
right? So you can get organic cotton or you can get GOT certified organic cotton. And to get the GOT certified organic cotton, you actually, as a business, we had to, I think, go 9 months process. Because they only not just look at where the cotton is grown to the yarn made and everything, but also is the factory providing ethical fair wage, and all of this are taken into consideration when making into a fabric. And those are the bodies that you look into. And yeah, I guess
no,
that's
absolutely. And I think to add to this as well, there's a huge misconception sometimes as to where our fabrics come from. So for instance, I think a lot of consumers might not be aware that some of the textiles that we wear come from wood pulp, for instance, and actually contribute to deforestation. And we've seen that in our research as well, where in the index we found that a lot of brands have commitments on their packaging and stopping deforestation by using FSC certified packaging, whereas when it comes to using viscose, for instance, they have absolutely no targets, they have absolutely no plan in place. So it's definitely something that we need to raise awareness on as well. And as you mentioned, Ruby, earlier on, you said that every every stage of the life cycle has an impact. Yeah. Was there something within your own supply chain where at some point you were quite surprised about, you know, a specific aspect that had an unforeseen environmental impact, for instance? So yeah.
I think logistics does always have the huge impact, and it's when you start a business, it's very difficult to weigh between what is right for you, what is right for business, what is right for the customer, kind of thing. And I think that was one of the biggest things that we had, still now we have to commit to, is because all of our underwear are made in China. So it comes from quite a long way, whether it's come by sea, we have got emergency supply needed, we bring it by air, and which we are totally not happy about, and we want to change this. But as you're a growing business, you are meeting that demand as well. I think, but that is still shocking, and we are still working on like how can we reduce the carbon footprint of the logistic part of the business. You know, should we bring the business closer to the home? We started with manufacturing here in the UK, but the lingerie manufacturer shut down. But the cost that they were charging us, a customer would never be able to afford it. So there's this dilemma, you know, like how much will the customer pay for that product? Should I bring it from here, Europe, or China? So yeah, I think that is still a work in progress. But what we have done recently is we have done the carbon footprint analysis of each of the product that we make, and we are trying to see, will the post-consumer, like after people using the underwear, make a huge impact in reducing that carbon footprint in the logistics side business. Yeah. So we found out that compared to disposable tampons and pads, period pants have got 1/5 of the carbon footprint. So that is from the material sourcing to travel and everything. So
wow, that's really impressive, especially for, I mean, even larger brands we found don't even track their carbon footprint at every level. So it's really impressive to see a brand like yours actually tracking their carbon footprint. So could you explain a little bit what does the process involve in general to be able to say, okay, so this is the carbon footprint at this stage?
Okay, so it usually starts from where the fabric is actually sourced and the travel it takes to come to the factory. The electricity, every energy used in the factory is calculated. Then from the factory to either the port or to the plane, whichever route it comes from, and you have to clearly identify what percentage of your shipment comes through sea or by air. And once you get that, then we calculate from the port here in Portsmouth all the way to our warehouse, and we get an average distance from our warehouse to, let's say, for example, we put Scotland as our average distance for the shipment to travel. All of that is tracked when you're doing an application for the carbon footprint. And we did the post-analysis where we compared that with the disposable tampons and pads. So now then you have to get all the life cycle of the disposable tampons and pads as well, whatever you're calculating. And then once those all information are together, then you can find the difference. And obviously with a product like ours, you can use more than 2 years one period pads, compared to single-use product that is thrown into the landfill with 1 use. So yeah, it's quite a huge process. It normally takes about 15 months, roughly from the start to the end of it. It's almost like B Corp. Some of the companies that are doing B Corps, but we totally focused on the sustainable side of the business and did the carbon footprint assessment.
Yeah, no, because that's it's a very long, it's a very difficult process to put in place as well. Obviously, having to track every single impact across the whole supply chain, it's a long and very strenuous type of work that you've done there.
With the underwear, we have got different parts, so they literally calculate how much the band is to how much the elastane that is used on the fabric. We also have gusset of different kind of things, so you are measuring, cutting every part of the gusset and weighing it. Actually, to find out, it's quite interesting, fascinating,
Definitely. And how about you, Charlie? When you look at advising also designers who are buying materials, so what are the things that they should look for from your perspective? Obviously, it depends on the business and so on. So I don't know if you advise them as well to do a carbon footprint, for instance, for all their materials, or whether you'd focus more on weighing up the social and environmental aspects. So what is your
so gosh, it's again really complicated, but what I found really interesting, I guess, learning about this as a fashion designer was suddenly realizing that maybe you kind of assume that all of the impact happens at the making stage and maybe the fabric making stage. Absolutely. But actually it happens when you get the product, all the way to how your customer uses it and what they do with it at the end of its life cycle. And that actually has the biggest impact, across the life cycle of a product. The biggest impact happens in your customer's hands. How are they using your product? How are they washing it? And actually that then dictates what kind of fibers you should be using. So actually, you might find that a hand-woven silk is a really beautiful textile, but then you realize that maybe your customer is going to be dry cleaning that product every time they wear it, and then actually that might change your decision on the fibers that you should be using. So
that makes perfect sense. And I think also the way that the customer will manage their garments after they decide they're done using them as well, whether they either try to mend them or whether, obviously now with clothes being so disposable, and I think there's more brands that are putting in place take-back schemes. Take-back schemes obviously are part of the solution, but are they really the answer to the amount of clothes that we're producing today? And are they really, are they also not having some sort of negative environmental and social impacts, especially when we know that a lot of clothes that we give back to brands are actually shipped to other countries, and a lot of countries are then expected to manage a huge amount of clothes that would otherwise not be used, and it creates pollution, but not here in other countries. So on that note, would you have anything to say about how we about the crisis that is waste in the fashion industry and how brands are currently managing their waste issue. And if you as a brand have any tips on how you try to minimize waste at the consumer level or as a brand as well.
Yeah.
So I'll start with you, Ruby.
Okay. I think yes. I was looking at one of the TikTok videos or something. Somebody made it about the clothes that we use going to African countries, and basically they are forced to resell it. But then the local people who produce the clothes themselves over there won't be able to sell their clothes, kind of thing, because they come as so cost-effective kind of thing. Anything that we send it from here, but the vendors do pay for the clothes that we send out. You know, they don't go for free. So that's another thing. I think post-consumer, I always say, please do not wash your clothes so much. That's the one rule. You know, wear at least your clothes, even if it's sweaty, just hang dry it in the air, and then you can wear it up to 4 or 5 times. You don't have to wash your clothes as often as you think you do. You also do like a shower wash. So many times with my dresses and stuff, when I'm having a shower, I just wash it there and then just hang it. So it utilizes both water kind of thing, if you want to think about it that way. And these are the tips that we always give it to our customer as well. Like, you know, you don't have to put your underwear through washing machine all the time after use. You can just hand wash it quickly in the sink or in the shower, those kind of things. I think those are the things like we can take action, small steps to lengthen the life cycle of the clothes. Also, I was listening to a podcast called Wardrobe Crisis, and they were talking about rental, and I think that's one way to go, especially for occasions and stuff. You know, like you don't have to buy blinging clothes that is mostly synthetics most of the time. You can just rent it and use it for different occasions and stuff. So there are, like, I think, options out there that you can do, but it all starts from us, how we can make that small changes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's, really, really nice points. I'm sorry, I was checking my phone because actually I told Delphine earlier I cannot remember stats. But before, I had this stat that I just wanted to make sure I got right. So we spoke to Oxfam recently about how they manage all the clothes that get sent abroad, because it was such a, such a huge issue. And so they were saying that they get 300,000 tons of clothing ends up in landfill every year just in the UK, and they are diverting 15,000 tons of it themselves, and none of it goes back into landfill. It's unbelievable, like the system that they have got set up, and the way that they manage sending those textiles abroad. They go to a cooperative, and all of the profits go back into Oxfam's, I think it's in Senegal, what they're doing in Senegal. So yeah, it's incredible that kind of the life cycle of the clothing in that way. And they've also set up schemes where any clothes that they can't use, they're working with people like M&S to do the recycled fibre suits, I think, shopping, something or other. So that's kind of one thing that I think is really important. And again, I think how many people are actually designers in here? Just wondering who we're talking to. Okay, so everyone just sort of consumers, just want to learn more about how to be more sustainable. Okay, great. So we spoke to the guys behind, Method Washing, all the like eco-friendly soaps, and the guy that does the formulations. My mind was like, whoa. And I was like, so what do we do? How do we minimize the impact of what we're doing? And he was just like, turn your clothes inside out when you wash them. And I was like, is that it? Oh my God. He was like, yeah, because if you leave them the right way around, obviously every time they go in the washing machine, they're just abrasing, and that's how you're, ruining your clothes faster. And I was like, why do we not tell people that? Why do we not say that on labels? Turn this inside out when you wash it, or hand wash it, put it in the shower, that kind of stuff. So really simple stuff like that, I think, is also very powerful.
Absolutely, and we've seen through our research as well, I think brands are starting to think about the way their clothes are not just made but are used as well, which is great to see. But there's still so very little information. I mean, and also how many people actually look at their labels in detail and think, okay, so this item I need to wash at 40 degrees with this product, and I need to leave it to air dry for this amount of time and so on. I think there's still a lot of misconception about how we should wash our fabrics.
Yeah.
And
actually, how many people do look at the label when you're buying things? Yeah, it drives my friends crazy because I'm just like in every garment, like yeah. Oh, that's good. That's interesting. Okay.
The minute you feel it, it's like, oh, is that lyocell?
Absolutely.
You can start to feel. After a while, I think you'll know, like, okay, this is this fabric. This is this fabric. It's good to touch.
And I guess speaking of labels as well, that one of the biggest issues at the moment, and a lot of brands try to use the circular economy as a sort of silver bullet that will solve the waste crisis in the fashion industry. But what we're seeing more and more is that obviously when you look at the label, for instance, you might see that there's 3 or 4 different materials in your t-shirt, in your dress and so on, which makes it, well, correct me if I'm wrong, but it does make it a lot harder to recycle with the current technology that we have. So in your opinion, when we think about also recycled materials and we think about advising young designers as well to use recycled material, what's your views on that as well? And also, what are the technologies available at the moment? What do you think of the technologies at the moment on the market? Do you think they would solve the issue, or do you think they're just, at the moment, they're not able to take the amount of waste that is currently produced and actually recycle into new fibers that would actually last a long time and not, after 2 washes be completely destroyed? So I'll start with you, Ruby.
Yeah. So I think I would say is like next time you go buy clothes, maybe pay a little bit more, but buy a quality clothes and not from like Shine or Shein, whatever, which literally destroys after like a couple of washes, or even H&M and all this kind of thing. So you can start from there, and also think about, do you really need the thing that you're looking on your phone, that you're thinking about how to buy, and it's shiny and it's nice and beautiful kind of thing? Do you really need that in your life? And I think Know the Origin does this. Whenever you go to their product, it tells you what is the cost of use. So if you use it 10 times, how much it will cost you. So think about that as well. I think money drives us quite a lot, right? Our mentality and everything. We always think about is it expensive or not? But think about is it worth it, the money that I'm paying? Do I really need it? I guess start from there. In terms of recycling, I would say there's not a lot in here. I was looking at the whole take-back scheme kind of thing. Obviously, our underwear has got different layers and different panel. So should the underwear come back to us, we have to actually cut it open, separate every fabric out, and then send it to the recycling center. There are, I think, a couple of them, one in London called First Mile, but do reach out to them and ask if the clothes that you are sending actually gets recycled. Because what they do is they take, I think, especially with the duvet cover and bed sheets and all this kind of thing, they do take it and then shred it and turn into stuffings for the sofas and stuff. So I think it's a little bit of work you'll have to do in terms of researching and everything. There are a few companies who are doing it, but not a lot. Not at a scale like you have in India or in Africa and all this kind of thing.
Yeah. So I guess from the fabric technology side of things, it's definitely getting there. So we've got more companies who are developing technology that can separate the fibers. So if you've mixed a synthetic with a natural fiber, historically you haven't been able to separate them, which is why people are a bit, that aren't that keen on using or trying to recycle fabrics. But now there is that technology there. So I would say, while it's not the perfect solution now, being able to use recycled textiles is a step forward until we have that technology. You are helping to minimize that impact of those fabrics going to landfill just by delaying it going to landfill for however long it might be. And a lot of companies thinking about, like, more of the design element, I guess, are doing things like design for disassembly. So you can deconstruct the thing that might have, something that maybe is synthetic, a knee patch or something, because it needs to be abrasive. You can take it off so that it's not mixed with natural fibers. Designers are getting more on board with the idea of designing things that can be taken apart as well.
And I think it comes down to also just thinking of every single stage of the life cycle of the garment has an impact, but not just when it's being produced, or not just at that stage, but in the future as well. So when we think of design again, designers who, for instance, when they design their clothes, whether there's certain ways to cut the fabric that are going to be more wasteful than others, that's something that you need to think about. And then, as you mentioned, if there's ways to disassemble clothes so they can be recycled in the future more easily, that's also definitely something to think about. But I think there's so many different aspects and so many different moving parts that we need to think about in order to get to a point where we can actually manage the amount of waste that is produced in the industry. So really looking forward to having these technologies being put in place, and so that they become more able to deal with that on a large scale. So absolutely. And I guess, Ruby, you kind of touched upon the idea of obviously buying good clothes, maybe investing a bit more into the pieces that you buy, making sure that you actually need them. So in your opinion, Charlie, what makes a good item of clothing, basically?
In what way? What do you mean?
So from an environmental perspective, how would you advise, like, your friends or customers or your family, what would you recommend to look for when you're buying a new or recycled or a secondhand item of clothing?
Yeah, okay, that's a really good question. So I think I would tend to start with secondhand. So that's the best way that you can shop, really, is buying stuff that's already in use. I think, I don't know if this is an accurate quote, but I was talking to, the founder of People Tree, Safi.
Yes.
Yeah, and she was like, we've got enough clothes for 10 years. And I was like, have we? Oh my God. So yes, that was pretty staggering. Shopping secondhand first is the best thing that you can do by far. And then if you're buying new, I would say to look at the fiber content, what is it made of, and how you can wash it. Is it something that, you don't have to dry clean? Is it something that, you don't have to wash that often, that kind of stuff. Also, that it's a product that you absolutely adore. So really Marie Kondo, style shopping. Does this bring me joy in the moment, but also for the next 10 years? Yes, okay. And then what else? And then, looking at the business itself. So how does the business look after its people? Are they, B Corp certified? Are they paying fair wages? And do they have accreditations to say that? Those are probably the things I would look for.
Yeah, no, fair enough. Cool. I guess that's also my last question, is also quite a big question. But so what do you think? So obviously at the moment, well, we know that there's a climate crisis. Unfortunately, it also feels like the industry is moving too slowly to actually address the its environmental impact. So what do you think it's going to take the fashion industry to address the climate crisis in an actual tangible way? I'll start with you, Ruby.
Okay. I think there are a lot of greenwashing when it comes to a lot of business and stuff. So do your homework, I would say, in terms of finding a brand that actually really resonates with you and you feel like you are being part of it and you're not contributing to more waste or environmental impact. I think it's always good to start with that, because I think in my industry, what I've found is in the last 4 years, period pants have just boomed like crazy, to the fact that I think a few months ago, Primark started doing period pants at £7 a pair. Now, I've been in this business for quite a while, right? When you're paying £7 a period pants, you are not paying somebody along the line, or you are using the worst of the worst fabric that is out there kind of thing. So think about that as well. Sustainability does come with the price tag, but it's all up to you how you want to lengthen the period of the time that you use the product. So you can actually reduce the carbon footprint by using the same product for years and years. And I think that's the way to go, is use what you have got before going and buying anything else. I started with growing up from my mom's sari rag as my menstrual product. So that my mom wore that sari for years and then turned into like a small pieces of the rags, which my sister used it as her period product, then passed it into sisters to me. And it wouldn't stop there, you know, like after using for a few years as a menstrual product, that used to be turned into like rags to mop the floor or something. So it's that extending the life cycle of the clothes, I think, is very important.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Yeah, I'd agree. Every time you talk, I'm like so involved, I completely forget what I was going to say. Wait, what were we talking about?
So basically, what's it going to take for the fashion industry to address the climate crisis?
Yes. So first of all, it will take, I believe, either from governmental level change. Policy making. People don't change until they're told that they have to legally. And then the second thing is by us as consumers. You know, businesses like H&M are not stupid. You know, if they're not making the sales, they're not going to make the clothes because they don't want to deal with losing that money. You know, they're not stupid. Yeah. If we're not buying it, they're not making it. Like, that's as simple as that. I'm always really surprised because I'm kind of in like a little eco bubble where no one I know really shops at those places. I'm like, who's still going there? And then you go on YouTube and it's like, my Primark fashion haul this week. And you're like, oh my God, it's you. You're the ones. Oh my God. So I'm sort of still in my eco world where, you know, I don't understand who's still shopping there. But there are people that still go there. So we kind of have to find a way to convince them not to do that anymore, which is very difficult.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Addressing that Primark haul thing, you know, that ends up in like a Depop and stuff, which you think that, okay, there are secondhand clothes kind of thing. They're actually quite not.
Yeah,
so you just have to be very careful.
Really?
Exactly. So just be careful about like all of the people who buy a haul and then resell it. That is definitely not secondhand handing down. It's just like, one way to make money kind of thing.
We'll make sure that if you do buy it, you'll use it for a very, very long time.
Yes,
exactly.
No, absolutely. And I guess to add a little bit on that as well, I think from a fashion revolution perspective, I think we definitely see that there is a need for legislation, not just at UK level, not just at EU level, but at global level when it comes to clothes production, because ultimately, you know, if one country has specific laws when it comes to waste, like France, for instance, I don't know if any of you have followed these news, but basically the French government has put in place a law which states that now French brands can no longer destroy products that haven't been used but have been produced, which means that they're actively trying to reduce waste. That's one country out of, you know, how many in the world? If we do not take active, if governments do not take an active role, brands will not legislate themselves, unfortunately, and that's what we've seen as well with the case of H&M and putting in place initiatives to promote the circular economy and having more recycled fabric and also having take-back schemes. Obviously, these are part of the solution, but ultimately, if they keep on producing and churning the amount of clothes that they do today, and up until last year, we had the figure of how many items of clothing they produced and they put on the market, which is absolutely huge, and then the amount of waste that they also put on the market as well, and waste is clothes that they haven't even sold. It's just clothes that they have produced and they've not even sold because they couldn't even go through those stocks. I mean, it's the only way to address that in a tangible way is to have legislation on this, and obviously consumers have a role to play. But ultimately, it's very important if, as a citizen, you feel really passionate about these issues to. Obviously act on an individual level where you buy less, but also start campaigning or start emailing the people who are in power. So that means emailing your MP on these issues, for instance, getting in touch with local campaigns on, there's obviously local campaigns depending on where you live to really campaign to reduce the waste in the fashion industry. But ultimately, it really comes down to creating tangible legislation in my perspective as well. So.
Well, when it comes to legislation, I've got a shocking news that period pants are still taxed at 20%. And there are reusable options, right?
Yeah.
Compared to single-use tampons and pads. From January this year, they reduced it to 0%.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, but they left period pants as 20% luxury tax. Oh. So we've been lobbying government to say that, you know, sustainable products should be maybe tax levied so that the price can come down and more consumer can actually opt for a sustainable option. So there's a petition going on. We'll share it. I don't know how we're going to share it, but you can come and talk to me, and I can tell more about it. But that's the backward we are going. You know, like how is like a sustainable product that can be used forever. The government did a £21 million funding for a pre-period product in schools and everywhere to end period poverty, and everything distributed was disposable. So, yeah.
It really goes to show that if you want change, you definitely have to lobby the government.
Yes,
at some point.
Policy change.
But yeah, so I think if anyone has any questions as well, if you have any finishing notes or quotes or statements from our two panelists, I think we can move on to questions if anyone has any specific questions. So yeah.
So I'm guessing that you would both like to see sort of the kind of labelling that you get with food, although that could be better still. But you know, so for example, if I was buying free-range pork, it would say free-range pork, or it's organic, or it's so there's some sort of history about where it comes from, and I'm guessing you'd like to see that with fabrics. So when we purchase a garment, it would give you some information.
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty good now, I think. It could be more explicit. Yeah, what's kind of annoying is that in order to say something's organic, you have to be certified. So it would usually say what the certification is on the label. What can get really tricky is, so we work with hand weavers in a cooperative in India that work with organic fibres, but they're not accredited because it's too expensive, and that's where it gets a bit tricky. So you want to say it's organic even though it hasn't got the certification. So I think it's kind of more information is really good. I don't know how it's presented. I think what's quite nice about blockchain is the technology there, where you could maybe have like a QR code, because the history of like a garment is so long, you couldn't put it on a label. It would be like a scroll. But maybe something like a QR code or something, that would be amazing. Yeah, stuff like that. Transparency is amazing.
I think the label thing is quite interesting, especially just for the carbon footprint from the material to the production to in the shelf. If it says like, okay, this has got this much carbon footprint, if we have made like a standard kind of thing, there itself is like a massive change we can make. It's like,
that would be good. Like, you know how you get on food, it says how much salt and sugar is in things, like a red, green, amber symbol. Something like that. For
so
like
we could just go there. That's an interesting idea.
And I think another thing as well is that when you look at your clothes at the moment, it would say made in this country.
Yes.
Realistically, how many clothes, and I think that's also a myth that needs to be debunked, is like how, when we look at our clothes, where are they actually made? Because you can grow your cotton in a specific country, then you can gin it in another country, then you can dye it in another country, then you can like put it together and sew it together in another country, and there's like so many different countries that are actually involved. So when we think about the made in, it's actually quite misleading, because realistically, how many items are even made in Britain from like start to finish? How many, have we actually grown the fabric here? Have we actually like made the fabric here? Or has it actually been that we've imported the fabric and then we've made the garments that we're able to say, well, the clothing has been made in this country. So that's also something that a lot of governments as well around the world are kind of using, because there's quotas on how much you can export abroad. And I think that would be really useful from an environmental perspective as well, to be able to say, well, this is where this item has been, and then tracking the environmental impact in every country at every stage of the life cycle.
Because this has been done in the food, right? You can track I think Sainsbury's did like a fish. You can track from the port to the thing. So I think it's doable. About the where the product is made, you can have all the products made somewhere else and bring it to UK and just finish up the zip or button, and you can actually say made in Britain. That's how
it works.
Bad it is, so.
So I'm also quite interested in that. I'm going to jump in. So I'm also quite interested in that. The concept of cradle to grave technology, which there is some push for white goods, for example, for manufacturers to take that on board. And I'm wondering how much one could apply that way of thinking to fabric and clothes, and what impact that would have and how might that look?
Do you mean
Well,
cradle
Yes.
to cradle to
So
cradle?
with white goods, it's the idea that when you manufacture a white good, a fridge
Yeah.
or a freezer, that you have thought about what happens when it stops working.
Yeah.
So so where does it go? What does it? Is there places where it can be repaired? What happens? Where does it go? I know you've touched on this a bit, but I'm wondering if that could be sort of cooked up in terms of how we approach textiles and clothing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's perfectly possible. I don't see why not. I don't know how to expand on it, really.
I think you need to have a technology in place in the country to actually change into either other fabric or in the beginning, can we start developing a fabric that actually can be cradle to cradle, cradle to
Yeah, and it's actually the case already. Some brands are already cradle to cradle certified for certain items of clothing. They're starting to be certified for this specifically, and they're looking more into the circular economy. Well,
because the main culprit here is elastane, spandex, polyester. We are talking about, right? These are petroleum-derived fabrics that will take quite a while to disintegrate and all this kind of thing. So should there be an innovation in those fabrics into like fully biodegradable? Your cotton is like 100% cotton is. That goes into the ground and actually turns into soil, and it's fine. It's the elastane, and I would say those are the main, and they are pretty much in every clothes these days. Anything that expands has got elastane in them. So I guess innovation in fabric that is completely biodegradable, made from bioproduct as well, not from the petroleum. I think that'll be the one way to go. But I think because we have taken almost everything offshore, from production to disintegration to any factories kind of thing. So things have to go somewhere else to actually be turned into something.
Yeah.
So bringing that back in would be good, I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it was about a year ago I discovered that a lot of returns get incinerated like straight away, and they're not put back like for sale. And I was just wondering if there was any kind of stats on how widespread this is. Is it really quite common, or is there any kind of transparency we should be demanding from brands about what happens to the clothes we return? Because I know so many photographers who will buy clothes, have their models in it, and return the clothes afterwards, and it's just I don't think they even know that a lot of the clothes will just end up getting incinerated and they've just used it once.
I think it starts even earlier than that. So there's some brands, I don't know if you've heard of the Burberry scandals a few years ago. Burberry actually incinerates, and it's not just Burberry, it's a lot of brands actually that
Victoria's
do it.
Secret.
I mean, so many brands. I think any brand that you can think of realistically does it to a certain extent. But specifically in the luxury fashion industry, why do brands like Burberry burn their clothes? Even before they've reached consumers, is to keep their products as luxurious, because if you have too many of one item on the market, realistically, it's not as exclusive. B, if there's a small defect, and C, they've just produced too much, they don't have the space to stock it. So that's even before they've been sold to consumers. And then obviously, as you mentioned, the take-back schemes. That is also one question that we do have in our index, where we ask brands to disclose specifically what they do with the clothes that they receive from take-back schemes. And most brands do tend to disclose what they actually do, but unfortunately it's still a very, very opaque issue in the industry, just like the rest of the environmental issues in the fashion industry. So that's definitely something that we're pushing for. Unfortunately, there's no viable stats because brands are incredibly opaque on this issue. Yeah.
Ask the brand, basically.
Yeah, all you can do is email the brand, ask them directly what they do, and if they do that, what is the quantity of products they do that with. That they will reply in a very straightforward way, but you can always try.
I also figure it out if the brand uses their warehouse to ship the product and the returns goes to their warehouse, because these days quite a lot of brands started using third-party fulfillment kind of thing. So, and it becomes expensive for them to take the return back and then whether send it back to the brand or you know,
Just
it's
chuck it.
cheaper to chuck it away. So ask them about those kind of things as well. But
Sorry, you had one question.
What are your thoughts on, say, fast fashion brands coming up with the eco ranges? So it's this weird thing of like, I kind of want to encourage them to push towards eco-conscious ranges, but I also don't want to give them any of my money.
oh, greenwashing. That's the thing. I guess, again, you have to go back to brands and say, like, what percentage of the clothes are eco, and why can't they do all the range in eco, you know, in the first place? Because they've got power, they've got money, they've got, I think, everything. I don't see why not, and why only, like, few lines are made in. So
I think one thing that's important to note, though, is that the way the fast fashion industry operates, we call certain brands fast fashion, but ultimately their business model and the amount of clothes they produce is in some cases quite similar to other brands that are considered luxury fashion. So obviously, like, a luxury fashion brand will not produce as much as your typical Shein or your typical H&M, but ultimately they do have very similar business models, and they can use the same factories to make their clothes. The price, I mean, the price tag on their clothes is going to be very different, but ultimately they've been made in the same factory using the same fabrics in the same conditions, and then they're going to be shipped to different places and sold for very different prices. But ultimately, it comes down to where they've been made and in what condition. So I think that's also something to be aware of in the fashion industry, is that a lot of brands actually operate in similar ways, might not produce the same amount, but do. When you look at a T-shirt that's been made by a luxury brand, a cotton T-shirt versus a cotton T-shirt that's been made by another brand, ultimately sometimes they've been made in the same factory. So
I have a few comments about this. Sorry if I have a second, because I actually disagree with Ruby. I don't think it's greenwashing. I find greenwashing is really when someone is trying to deceive you about how they're being green. H&M has never said they're not a fast fashion company. That is their business model. So for me, I actually am really pleased that they've started doing conscious lines, because it's a massive marketing scheme. It tells people who have never heard of the word organic cotton what it means. I went into M&S, actually this was a few years ago now, and I asked somebody for an organic cotton T-shirt, and she hadn't got the faintest idea what I was talking about. She was like, "Do you mean just cotton, like a cotton T-shirt?" And I was like, "No." So it's an amazing awareness-raising campaign, but I wouldn't shop there still. And at the same time, there's a big conversation around how ethical fashion is something for the privileged. It is something that when you're buying something that's brand new, there is generally a higher price tag for, and also it's a privilege to be able to think about where you're buying your products from. A lot of people don't have that privilege. That is not what they're thinking about on a day-to-day basis. But bringing in ethical fashion to somewhere that can provide organic fibers at half the price or a third of the price of anywhere else you'd find it, does give someone who can't afford to buy something brand new that has been ethically produced, it does give them that option, which I think is a good thing as well. So I don't agree with H&M's business structure or business model, but I do think what they're doing is actually a good thing.
And I think that's one of the conversations that we hear a lot in the sustainable fashion space is, do you divest, meaning do you stop shopping there? Do you just boycott all the brands that are considered like fast fashion, or do you actually push for them to change from within? And I think that's a very important discussion to have, because ultimately you could argue that by pushing brands like H&M to do better, you're actually changing an industry, because they are such a huge player within the industry, rather than ultimately smaller brands have less power to change a whole industry. If a brand like H&M starts putting in place certain things from an environmental perspective, their environmental impact as a whole is completely shifted as well. So that's one aspect of it. But you could also argue the opposite and say, well, ultimately a brand like H&M should not exist at all, and that's why everyone should come together and just not shop there ever again. So it's a very complex conversation to have.
And I don't know whether it's been the same this year, but for a few years running, H&M were the biggest buyers of organic cotton.
It's still the case.
Yeah, and that's amazing as well. That's unbelievable. So yeah.
But did they source the cotton from that Xinjiang province?
Oh, I mean,
Oh,
which
God knows,
brand?
I actually don't know.
That's
That's,
the
a good.
thing,
That's a very
right?
good point.
But then,
yeah.
but unfortunately, the thing is that we did also a bit of research on Xinjiang cotton, and ultimately, most of the brands actually do shop there, and they have no visibility on that as well. Because if you buy from even when it's certified, from even BCI, for instance, Better Cotton Initiative, you do not actually know exactly which country or which region it's sourced from. So ultimately, you could be linked to forced labour and you would not be aware of it. So it's a very
Even BCI.
BCI declared it
nice.
actually. They
Yeah.
used to get it from that province, and then they said that going forward they would not
Yeah.
buy anything. So it's those kind of thing, like those bodies taking those kind of immediate action
Absolutely.
that really matters. And yeah,
So sorry.
it's a minefield.
So, do you have any suggestions for shopping sustainably for shoes? Because I find that if I'm ever buying shoes secondhand, they'll deteriorate.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then if I'm buying new, the actual sustainable brands are really, really expensive. But then I don't want to be buying from fast fashion because I know that there's so many different aspects that are going into shoes, like the rubber, the cotton. It's just a minefield. So do you have any suggestions for buying shoes?
I don't really actually. I have exactly the same problems as you do.
I guess you buy one, wear more. I guess it's like exactly. And also with like leather shoes and stuff, you can actually go to your local cobbler and they can stitch it for you. And older they get, the comfortable they get as well, isn't it? So it's like, oh, I don't want to lose it. But yeah, they do fix quite a bit, and sole and all the stitch around as well. So
I also think some brands are starting take-back schemes for their shoes. So I think it might be worth looking at that as well, because I think, even large brands are starting to look at how they can deconstruct a shoe when it's been used so that they can recycle different parts. So that might be worth doing a bit of research on that. But ultimately, I think it comes down to buying shoes that you know are going to last long. And as you mentioned, Ruby, just going to see a cobbler or someone who can fix the sole of your shoe when it starts to degrade a bit and making it last as long as you can using the right products and so on. Is there a last question?
It's more of a comment just about the, I've noticed more and more, obviously you look at labels and you realise you're buying from somewhere like Whistles and H&M, it's all made in Myanmar. So I just found it interesting that if H&M says it's an eco-conscious whatever, is it still made in the same factory? It sort of seems like it's,
Probably, They may have got eco fibres, but I don't suppose the social impact.
No, I think usually the social aspect and the environmental aspect when you look at labels are, you don't usually see the social aspect on a label. You only see an environmental certification usually. So although obviously when you look at GOTS certified, for instance, it does include some social aspects. So that means specific types of audits in the factory and so on, making sure that there's specific rules that are respected in the factory. But ultimately, the social aspect on the label is not usually that present, I would say. I don't know if you have anything else to add. But
No, sometimes they say the ISO accreditation.
Oh, yes, that is true.
But
generally
usually on the website, not on the label, I guess.
Yeah, on
so
the website.
You won't be able to tell.
Yeah, but actually, I'd say people who have put effort into working with kind of creditable in a responsible way generally are shouting about it.
Yeah.
So you will be able to figure out. Not from H&M, but wherever else you're shopping, if they're doing something good, generally they're telling you about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Downstairs.
Oh, right, brilliant. Okay. Well, I think that's it then. Yeah.
Yes.
So thank you all so